Hello, my name is Dr. Ruth Moyse, and I'm going to be talking to you today about reframing the narrative of autistic girls absent from mainstream schools. And it's based on the doctoral research I did at the University of Reading. And I'll be sharing throughout this presentation some of the quotes from some of the girls who participated in this study with me, including the one that you see at the top of this screen. I was trying my hardest, and I felt very sad that I couldn't go. So a little bit of background about me. I regard myself as an insider researcher, if you like. I'm a primary teacher by profession and taught for 10 years in England and internationally. And I'm also a parent to two children, one of whom is my daughter that you see in the photograph there in front of you. She was diagnosed as autistic when she was 5, and I was diagnosed autistic shortly after that. And since then, I have worked for a number of organisations, including a local Berkshire charity, local to me, called Parenting Special Children. I did my doctoral research at the University of Reading, and I'm currently a research fellow at the University of Southampton and an associate and director for AT Autism. And I mention these things because, of course, our backgrounds shape our beliefs and inform the way that I conduct my research. So an overview of what I'm going to be sharing with you today. I'll be giving you some information about how girls are perceived in schools by some staff and the absence of their views, the girls' views, talking about the creative methods that I used during my research and sharing some of the findings, and also sharing some recommendations from the girls about how to ensure that they can thrive in school rather than leave. Now, if we were to ask school teachers and SENCOs, and these quotes are taken from exactly those people, class teachers and SENCOs from primary schools actually, about clinically diagnosed autistic girls, you could be mistaken for thinking that there is no problem. You can see there is nothing, I see nothing, I don't have to cope with anything. We have children with more needs. And this suggests that actually an assessment of needs is based very much on what teachers see or what the impact on them or on the class or on the rest of the school may be, rather than on the girl themselves. And the image that you see there actually is a still from the animation Walk in My Shoes, which Erin Davison will either be showing you after this talk or indeed have shown you just before. So some data from the research. This is data from a freedom of information request to the Department for Education, looking at persistent absentees at secondary school. Now, the first bit of information that I got from them showed that there was very little difference actually between males and females at secondary school in terms of absentee rates. However, when we look specifically at autistic pupils, there is a difference. So on this graph here, we have percentages on the left-hand side, and we have years or academic years running from left to right from 2009-10 through to 2016-17. The bright pink block on the left-hand side of each year is males, and the lilac is autistic females. And you can see that autistic females are significantly more likely to be persistent absentees at secondary school than autistic males. So despite the fact that there do not seem to be a problem from the way they look, there certainly seems to be a problem in terms of attendance. And the sort of language that teachers use and SENCOs use about autistic girls is also slightly problematic and worth looking at. So this is based on some case studies that I did from some NHS records, looking at the descriptions and the documents which preceded a girl up from the point of referral up to assessment. And you can see that the description fell into one of two categories, more or less. On the first type of description, we had girls who were working hard, who were opting out or hiding in cupboards, who were submissive or indeed compliant. And the second type of description, and the names in brackets, by the way, are all pseudonyms as they are throughout this presentation. We have girls being described as resistant or a burden or lashing out or an attention seeker. And Interestingly, it was actually the girls who met the criteria in the second type of description who were the ones that were referred quickest and had the assessment soonest, and indeed had more support than the girls who were the compliant ones who opted out. So they were unseen and unheard. Their voices throughout the case studies that I did, their voices were absent until the point of assessment. And some of these girls actually reached crisis point before they had that access to autism assessment. So I used some more creative methods of trying to find out why these girls stopped attending school. One of the methods I used was an exercise around the ideal school, or a personal construct of the ideal school, hoping that their girls would draw their answers. Nevertheless, they asked me to describe them, or they typed them if we were doing the interview online. And of course, other ways of assessing a view of a school might be to use photographs, for example. So once they had done their personal construct of the ideal school, answering questions first about the sort of school they did not want to go to, and then about their ideal school, I asked them to then use diamond ranking with the answers about their ideal school to give me an idea about what sort of themes were coming out most strongly. And in this case, this particular girl, Sally, she put students' well-being at the top of her diamond ranking. And in fact, the ethos of the school came out very strongly as being important to them, as did the way that the adults treated them. And that's actually indicated by the yellow writing there. They wanted adults who were just and not prejudiced. And I conducted my second and third interviews with these girls using a life chart, which they took away with them and completed. And this is the template that I provided to them. They completed it and sent it back to me, and I generated individual question banks based on their own charts. And I'll explain that in a bit more detail using an example from Robin. So we have a horizontal line running across the center of the page chronologically from left to right, and then a vertical line on the left-hand side of your screen with good experiences going above that horizontal line and negative experiences going below that line. And I asked the girls to mark on these charts events of significance to them, events and experiences that meant something about their time in school. And higher up above the line, they put their positive experiences, that the more positive it was, and the lower down they put those experiences, the more negative it was. And what's interesting from this life chart, and indeed from all the others pretty much, was that there were multiple positive events as well as negative events, even though these girls ultimately left school when they were in secondary school. So it's useful to look at both the positive and the negative to see what we can learn from those, and to try and find out whether there are any recurrent themes running through those negative events. So Robin identified, and this is her doing the thematic analysis actually of her own negative events, as did all the girls. Sensory overload was something in blue that she felt ran through every single day, that had an impact on her every day at school. Force is in green, and she described that as rigidity and an abuse of power. Change is in pink, and examples there for her were losing a tooth or starting her period. Social expectations is in orange, so a teacher making me look her in the eye, or being forced to draw or write. And discrimination is her fifth one, which she describes, she gave an example of sexist football, for example. And some of those events, of course, had multiple themes across them, as you can see by her colour coding. But I also asked the girls to identify 3 positive events and 3 negative events, and tell me why the positive ones had worked so well and why the negative ones didn't work, and perhaps what could have been done instead. So in terms of absences, although these girls didn't leave until secondary school, half of them reported wanting to leave from the very first year they started school, but they had persevered for 8, sometimes 9 years. And there were multiple examples of informal absences that do not show up in official statistics, perhaps when they were using an exit pass to leave a classroom for respite, or they were not participating in a particular lesson, or they'd been asked not to take part in a particular class. And it raises the question, whose red flags are being used, and are the right ones being used when we come to think about autistic girls? So these girls in my study all identified themselves as being academically able. So what if our academic targets are being met? What if these internal absences are being unrecorded? So one of the girls was actually attending school for 80% of the time, but actually when she was in school, she was still only attending maybe only 40 or 50% of those actual classes. Or what if they were the ideal pupil? What if they were not causing anybody any distress, or having to get the teacher to do anything to help them to control the class, for example? And perhaps instead we should be asking the girls what factors are important for them, such as the environment, the overwhelming sensory environment, difficulties that they reported with sleep, and the overwhelming levels of anxiety that I know Erin will also mention. And from the positive events, an example here from a girl who called herself Daisy. She listed 3 events that you can see on the screen for you now, one of which was starting music lessons. Another was because that gave her a way to cope and escape from reality, felt like she was good at something for the first time, and meeting a teacher who believed in her, and that was something that enabled her to stay in mainstream for as long as she could. It gave her a safe space to hide and express her feelings. So these are really important, that we can draw on these positive events and these strengths to actually help enable attendance at school and to find ways to help them thrive. And on now then to their 5 recommendations. And the first one is just to listen. It's not rocket science, says Daisy. And of course, we don't just mean spoken word. We don't have to always capture the spoken word. We can capture views in other ways as well, using all sorts of different task-based activities to engage with them. Remembering to capture strengths and interests and not just difficulties, and to do this proactively, drawing on those strengths and building on strengths to hopefully minimize any negative experiences, but to enable them to cope with those that do. Be curious. So investigate why she is in unexpected places. Don't make assumptions. If she's not on the playground, find out why. It may be that she's trying to escape from bullies, for example, rather than the fact that she's being disobedient. Prioritize pupil well-being. And this is important, that you actually demonstrate that commitment to good mental health over exam grades, that you prioritize them feeling safe and cared about, that nurturing environment, so that these girls feel that they belong. And be accountable for pupil well-being in the same way that you have to be accountable for grades, for example. The girls in my study all said that they wanted to go to the sort of school that cared most about students. They did not want to go to the sort of school that cared most about grades. So again, the ethos and the attitude of the school is really vital to helping these children to thrive in school. They said they wanted staff to be more informed about what being autistic was really like. And that involves learning from an autistic trainer about what it means to be autistic, and understanding that if you internalize distress or overwhelm in school, it doesn't mean the reasons that cause that don't exist. And finally, Jane asks you to take action. So if they come to you with an issue, such as bullying, such as sensory overload, then act to resolve those damaging situations. Don't ignore them. Do a sensory audit of the school environment with an autistic young person, and give the girls greater autonomy to self-regulate without punishing them. And finally, provide access to learning at times when it is not possible to be in class, because these girls wanted to be in school. They were rejecting a toxic environment. They were not rejecting learning. In their ideal school, they wanted to be accepted, relaxed, safe, comfortable to be themselves, blending in and a part of it all, and fundamentally learning. Thank you very much for your time.